Welcome to SkewbSchool, and in this episode I will be showing you how you can improve your recognition. So I will especially show how you can recognize your centers quicker because recognizing the corners is really easy, because when you hold the cube like this you'll always be able to see the case you will get. And for the centers, you only need 3 centers to recognize the case. So for example, if you know all these 3 centers, you should know what the other 2 are for. And there are 3 ways how you can recognize it with 3 centers. You can recognize it by these 3 centers or these 3 centers. These are useful for normal solves, and then you can also recognize them by using these 3 centers. And these are only useful for one looking for when you want to see 3 easy ones to trace. At the end I will also be showing you something you can do with pi cases, because some centers will form blocks on the top. So for example, this can help you recognize this case quicker, for example. So I will be leaving timestamps for each of these parts in the description, so you can go to that part. And then something else that I notice that I do sometimes is use the gap here in between to recognize the center that is behind here. So for example, now we can kind of see from here that red is over here, blue here, and yellow here. So I notice that I sometimes do it to recognize the hue center. So if I hold it like this, sometimes I will look in this gap to see which cases. I'm not doing it on purpose, it's something that I just pick up by looking at the cube. So first of all, before we are going to see how you can recognize each case with 3 centers, we are going to look how each case looks like and how the pieces move. So here the H perm, so it's pretty obvious, they all move oppositely. Then you have the Z perm, and these are 2 swaps, so these pieces swap and these pieces swap. And then we have the U-perm, so these pieces move in the direction of the opposite, and the opposite will move to here, so it moves like this. For the vertical U-perm, or this O-perm, for O-perm they move in one direction, so the centers cycle in a clockwise direction, and they can also go in a counterclockwise direction if the U center is over here. And then here we have a Z-perm conjugate. It's got that name because it can be set up to a Z-perm in one move. And here these 2 pieces swap and these 2 pieces swap. And then you have the vertical U-perm, so here it's the same as before but then in a vertical way. And here you have a triple sledge case. It's got that name because when you do a triple sledge you solve this case. And it's a 2 swap here, and these 2 swap as well. And then here there are the more complex cases. So this is a swirl perm, and here are no opposite centers, so they all go in a loop. So we'll start with the U center, it moves to here, and it just goes around. So it's like one big loop as like the O perm, but then over all the centers. And then when there are 2 opposites, it's an X perm, and the pieces move like this. So we start with the U center, we go up, we go to the side, then we have an opposite, so we switch to the opposite side. Then we go to the opposite center and go back, so we move like that. And then we have a watt perm, that's one you only have one opposite. And then the centers move like this, so we go up, we go straight across the cube, then move to the opposite, go to here and then go here. So that are all the cases, and I will start going over how you can recognize each set of 3 centers. There isn't really much of a difference for when you would use these three centers, recognition of these three insolves. But one thing that is different is that it's kind of easier to recognize the cases when using these three centers. So for during solves it doesn't really make a difference, but this one is easier to learn. I'm also working on a recognition trainer for on my website SkewbSchool.com, but I don't know when it will be finished, but when it is, there will be a video about it on the channel. So when you use these three centers, it's a bit easier to recognize the cases. For example, here when you have three opposites, you immediately know you have a Z-perm. And here for the horizontal U-perm from all three angles, except for this one, it's pretty clear you have a U-perm, but for one, it's when you have a what-perm over here. So you have an opposite here, and this one moves the same way. The only one that's different is the one over here. With a U-perm, it moves like this, and with a what-perm, it moves the other direction. And then here the same, you can recognize this case from all angles pretty easily if you know how the pieces move. For a horizontal U-perm, the same. For the O-perm, it's also pretty easy to recognize from all angles. The triple sledge case also from all angles. And the X-perm is, you know immediately it's an X-perm except from one angle. From this angle, when you see you have an opposite center from the U center, and this one isn't solved, you know you have an X-perm. When you see two opposites and not an opposite, you know you have X-perm. Two opposites and U center, you know you have an X-perm. And here's the only case that can be is similar to the what-perm, as when you have a opposite here, U center here, and you're not solved center or opposite one. So here it looks very similar, except with the X-perm, this piece moves away from the U center, and with the what-perm it moves towards it. And what-perm is also easy to recognize from this angle. From this angle I just showed it. And here it can be a bit, you have two ones that aren't an opposite or a solved one, and it can be confusing with the swirl-perm because these two pieces move the same, but with the what-perm it moves away from here, and here it moves towards it. So we'll start off by how to recognize all cases with using these three centers. So when you see you have two opposite ones and a solved here, you know directly you have a H-perm. So then when you have, you know you have a U center, and you have you see that you have two ones that aren't opposite or solved. It can either be a U-perm or it can be a Z-perm. So if you see that these two swap, you know you have a Z-perm. And when you see this and you see that they don't move towards each other but go opposite, you know you have a Z-perm. And when you see that they flow in the direction, you know you have a U-perm. So then we will start going over when you have when you see you have the U center and an opposite one next to it. So we have these. So we have these three. So we see we have a U center here, and it moves towards the opposite one. When that happens, we know we have a X-perm. So when it moves towards the opposite one, we have a X-perm. When this one moves, goes straight through, you know you have a what-perm. When you see that this one moves back down, you know you have a triple sledge case. So now we have, when we have the U center and the one next to it isn't a solved one or opposite one. So when we see this moves up and moves away from the piece right here, and this piece moves towards the U center, we have a swirl perm with no opposites. And then here it's kind of similar to this one, where the top one moves away from the piece you see, but this one is opposite, so it moves to the other direction. Then you have two opposites. And then when you see that this one moves straight across and this one moves towards it, you know you have a watt perm with one opposite over here. And then when you see that these two moves towards each other and this one moves away, you know you have a Z perm conjugate. And the last one is when you have an O perm and this one moves down and this one moves towards it and you have a cycle, then you know you have an O perm. So when we see we don't have any opposites of U centers in these pieces, so it can either be this, that we have a 2 swap here and this one moves over here, and then we have a Z perm conjugate. And then when we have a watt perm, the pieces will look like this. So here we have actually like a Z perm. I can't find, okay, like here. So this looks like a Z perm, but then instead of the top center be solved, it moves down here, and to know where the U center is, you can recognize it like this. So when it moves like here, with the watt perm, it moves to the opposite center, so the U center will be back here. And then you can also have two swirl perms that you can have. So you can have it from this angle or from this angle, and you can recognize by this. So with a swirl perm, all the pieces move like in a circle. So when it moves to here, to one of the front pieces, you know that the U center will be back here. And when it's from this angle, you can see that it moves to the side here. So you know the U center will be over here. And then the last case is when you know you have a U center, the opposite one here, and then two pieces that aren't the U center or solved or opposites. So the difference is in between to where the U center goes. So if it goes to here, away from the center that's here, then it's an X perm, and when it moves towards this piece, you have a watt perm. Then you have two cases, one you have an opposite one and a solved one next to each other. And when you see that this piece moves to the side of the opposite, you know you have a triple sledge case. And when you see that it goes towards the opposite, you know you have a U perm. And now when you have the U center and you see you have a solved one, so when you see that this piece moves down here, you know you have a Z perm conjugate and you have a 2 swap in the back. And then when you see this and you see that it goes to the side, you know you have O perm, that these pieces all cycle. And the last case is when you have a vertical U perm. And you see, for example, you have this, and the U center goes on top, and this goes straight through, then you have a U perm. And then how to recognize which Z perm conjugate you have from this angle. You can look at this piece, the top piece, where it goes. When it goes to this side, the U center is here, but if it would go to this side, the U center would have been here. The O perm you can also recognize with the top column. So when you see two opposites here and you see this piece, if it moves to here, the U center will be here, and if it goes here, the U center will go here, so that you have the cycle. Now I will go over when we use these three centers. It isn't really useful for normal cells. For one looking, it can be easy sometimes. So what's also good about it, there aren't many possibilities because you only have this combination and this combination. So because when you would do this or you swap the recognition, you would get the same case. So when you have a solved center and two opposites, you know we have a H perm with a U perm. It's also pretty easy to recognize how it moves. So when you see the solved here one and this one here, to know where the opposite one is, it's towards which center it goes, because this center will always go towards the opposite one. So if it moves to here, the opposite one is here, and on the other side would be the same. And then here we have the Z perm. So here you would see two pieces that aren't opposites or solved, and then you would have to recognize it by knowing in which directions these pieces move. So if you see it moves to here, we have a 2 swap here. If it would move to there, we have a 2 swap there. So that's how you recognize the Z perm. And then when you have the U center here, and you see you have a solved one in the back, then it depends how the top one moves. If it moves towards the U center, you have a triple sledge case, and when it moves to the side, either one, you have an O perm, and depending on which side it goes, you have the other U perm, O perm. And then you also have when it goes to the other side, but there isn't a solved center or an opposite. So when it moves to the side here, that means that we have a swirl perm, and it will move in the direction where this piece goes. When it goes to the other side, we have a watt perm, and we can know where the opposite is by knowing in which direction the piece on the other side will move to, because it will always move towards the opposite. So it would move to here, so we know the opposite one is here. And then here, when we see this and we see that this one moves towards the U center, we know we have a 2 swap here and a 2 swap here, so we have a Z perm conjugate. And the last two cases is when we see that there's an opposite in the back. So if this piece, the top one, moves to the side, either one of them, there will be an opposite one, so we have an X perm. So if it moves to, and this will always move towards the opposite one, so if it moves to here, you have an opposite one here, and if it would go here, the opposite one would go here. Then we could also have a U perm, a vertical U perm, if it goes straight through, if it goes in one direction. So now when the U center is on the side, so we don't see the U center on these three pieces. When we see that there is no opposite one or solved, we know we have a swirl perm, and depending on which side this piece goes, we know in which direction the swirl perm will go. So if it goes to here, we will have a cycle like this. If it goes to here, we would have a cycle like that. And then here, when we have two solved ones and there is another piece on top, we know we have a triple sledge case. Here when we see that there is a solved center in the back, and this one moves to the side, and this one moves over here, we know we have a 2 swap here and a 2 swap here. And then we see two solved centers, and then we know we have a vertical U perm, and depending to which side this one goes, we know where the U center is, the opposite one is, because this piece will always move towards the opposite one. And when we have a solved one here, and we see that this one moves to here and this one moves to here, we know we have a cycle, so we have an O perm. And now we have two cases where we have an opposite one on the sides and then two pieces that aren't an opposite or solved. And then we have either an X-perm or a Y-perm. So when this piece moves towards the opposite one, we know we have an X-perm, and when it moves in next to the opposite one, we know we have a Y-perm. And depending from which side this comes, we know where the U-center is, because it always will move away from the U-center. So it moves to here, the U-center will be here. And here we can also know that when we can know which X-perm we have with the piece here in the back, because this one will always move away from the U-center. So if it moves to here, the U-center will be here. With pie cases, the centers on top often create blocks with the corners that are in the top, and this can help with recognizing cases. I don't know if this is ideal to do, but I use it for some cases. For example, for this case, when I see this one has to move to here and I have a big block, I know I have a swirl problem case. But when I see that there's not a block here, I know there is an opposite in the back, and this can help with, because you don't have to look at which direction this has to go. So now we see a block, but otherwise, if you would recognize it by these two centers, we would have to notice that this center has to go to here and not to here, as in this case. There are also some other cases. For another swirl problem case, you don't have a block, but you can clearly see that these pieces are opposite from each other. And then if this piece moves away from the U-center, you know that you have a swirl problem case. And here, when you see a big block, you know you have an X-perm. So you can use that to recognize the cases. Or here, for example, you see the U-center and an opposite, and when you look to the top, you have this. Then you know that you have only one, and when you see this opposite thing, you have two centers. So you can experiment with it, but I don't know if it's super useful.